Chair, and can I also thank my honourable friend, the member for Swansea East, for securing this important debate. Amongst the political toing and froing that surrounds decisions taken in this place, the consequences of those decisions that they have on innocent children are all too often shunted down the list of priorities. I agree, therefore, with the numerous calls from children's charities that we must now start to put children at the centre of our decision-making process. Shortly after the Chancellor announced his budget, I held a Child Poverty Summit in my Aberavon constituency, which included the Deputy Children's Commissioner in Wales, children's charities, council officers and local groups who deal with vulnerable children. The overwhelming message they wanted to convey in that summit was that the issue of child poverty was growing, but growing particularly in households where it never had been previously an issue, that is, in-work households. These are families where their incomes had previously stretched to cover the mortgage, bills, put food on the table and still have enough to live comfortably. But after years of pay freezes, increasing costs of fuel and the erosion of welfare support, they were just one unexpected bill away from not being able to cover their costs. Many are too proud now to ask for help, but we know that they're suffering. I feel that Dickensian conditions are creeping into our society. One example given to me at that round table was where children were being sent to school in a dirty uniform because their parents could not afford to put the washing machine on. Clothes swap initiatives sprang up to provide them with clean clothes. In a different example, children in receipt of free school meals were going hungry during school holidays without access to those meals. Surely this should not be happening in one of the richest countries in the world. In my Aberavon constituency, 3,910 children are living in poverty, and of those, 2,407 are in work poverty. The government's latest rounds of attacks on working families announced by the Chancellor in July will see 9,400 children in Aberavon adversely affected. The Secretary of State recently defended his policy to restrict universal credit to 2 children as bringing home to parents the reality that children cost money. Well, I'm sure we'd all like to thank the Secretary of State for those words of deep and profound wisdom. But this is not a teaching exercise. We're talking here about children's lives. Equally, questions remain over how the system will detect fathers, for example, who have multiple children with multiple women. If each mother claims for their children, then more than 2 of the father's children could be in receipt of universal credit. There are huge loopholes in this law, not just massive ethical and moral questions. And I also wonder what's happening with the party that currently occupies the government benches, which claims to be a socially liberal party, and in the old tradition of the term. And you could perhaps describe the 2 children policy as having government that's just large enough to fit into people's bedrooms. There's nothing wrong with making work pay, but it should not be at the expense of children. If the state abandons children when they're in need, what incentive does that give them to contribute to society later in life? I'd like to just close by taking a quote from the recent Conservative Party conference. We must ensure that we protect the hardest working and lowest paid. Shop workers, cleaners, the people who get up in the small hours or work through the night because they have dreams for what their families can achieve. And that was from the Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, otherwise known as the Mayor of London. I wonder whether that was simply part of some complex leadership bid. It may or may not have been, but the fact is that I think many on this side of the House would agree with those comments. Oh, yes, please, Susan, of course.
Would my honourable friend agree that abject failure is the only way of describing the government's welfare reform programme, which puts headlines ahead of the impact on children, the disabled and those vulnerable people that we as a society should be protecting?
Last 90 seconds for backbenchers.
I would agree absolutely with that view, and I think, as honourable members have said, this has to be about the bigger picture, about what sort of society we want to build, not about the headlines in the Daily Mail tomorrow. To close, the Conservative Party claims to be a one-nation party and to be the party of the workers. High-flying rhetoric indeed, but the reality is a story of division, attacking the most vulnerable in our society whilst cutting inheritance tax for the richest 60,000. The gap between the government's one nation rhetoric and the divisive reality of its policies is fast becoming a chasm. I urge the Minister to reconsider these policies and to close that gap.
Eileen Whiteford.
Thank you for a second time, Mr.